Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin and I'm back with more skills and stories from the wild. Today we are donning our rubber gloves and diving deep into the world of animal butchery. We are going to do that with Candace Lewis, who has very kindly offered to lend her time and her expertise in all things to do with breaking down animals. Now, I don't know about you, but there have definitely been more than a few times that I have been lucky enough to get an animal on the ground and then thought, oh crap, what now? Thankfully, Candace was able to answer all of the many questions that I had and every kind of situation I can remember and think of. So thanks again, Candace, for answering all my questions, and let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
So I'm very excited to have you here today. It's just kind of by chance that I happened to discover you across the social nuances of the web. But I was doing the thing that one does on the internet, and I discovered your handle, which is Lady Butcher, and that immediately just thought, oh, you'd be perfect to come on this show. Obviously jump in and correct me if this is wrong, but you are a butcher. You've been a butcher for quite some time. You are a butcher of farm animals and wild game. You're also a chef and a cooking instructor. And also, I believe you do instruction with butchery as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that's all true. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so we did have a little chat beforehand, and I've got to say, you got like a great, slightly lateral story, which I love, because I think people have a thing in their mind about, oh, wild game and all that kind of stuff. There's a kind of a normal route that people take, and I love the transition that you made. So what I want to do is go like right back to the beginning of your story, and kind of we can go from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you for having me also. Yeah. Yeah, so well, it's interesting because I feel that the community is represented as this machismo, all male, you know, type of but that's what butchers and hunters accustomedly
Yeah.
are just, but the truth is couldn't be further from that, I feel. I actually started out going to art school. I have a bachelor's degree in fine art. I was a sculpture major at California Institute of the Arts, or Cal Arts,
Okay.
which churns out a lot of people from Pixar.
Oh, does it?
Yeah,
And
so a lot of people.
where is that?
It's in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Mhm.
And is that
It's
where you
in,
grew up?
no, I actually grew up in Baltimore, Maryland.
Ah, okay.
So I'm from the East Coast originally, and then I decided to go do my undergraduate in LA, um, at Cal Arts, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah, sounds it. And
Yeah, it's a very eclectic school.
so I'm like jumping around a little bit now, forgive me. So but like your upbringing when you grew up, did you have much of a kind of connection with nature at that point, or were you kind of outdoorsy, or was it just,
No,
no. No. I mean
no, not at
that's
all.
that's cool.
Not at all. I grew up in the city in a Jewish family.
Okay.
So where I no, my father is a mortician though, which is probably what led me down the path of doing butchery.
Oh. So wait.
So death,
Yeah. Interesting. So
yeah.
so he was kind of working on what exactly does a mortician job involve? Sorry, we're going about
Uh,
talking about someone else, but
yeah, yeah. A mortician is somebody who arranges funerals and does the entire talks to the families and then sets up the burial.
okay. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess you grew up and you were always kind of around the
Hmm.
idea of mortality and
Exactly. That was my
interesting.
practice actually in art school. Like I did a lot of sculptures that were based on like my own life and my own story.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of work around the death industry. That was a big part of my practice, I guess, if you will.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So so okay, well now we're jumping around, but like so this is LA, and how long
Hmm.
were you in LA for?
Just 4 years while I did my undergraduate work. And
Okay.
then when I graduated, I moved to Northern California.
Okay.
hmm so during that period, I graduated in 2010. That was the kind of the height of the financial crisis. So there really weren't a lot of jobs available.
Hmm.
I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my art degree, but I played around with a few ideas, one of them being special effects makeup, but it just wasn't a good time to like really get a job, to be honest. And just a lot of places weren't hiring. So I moved to Northern California because that's where my parents were living at the time. So I
Okay.
just had some sort of financial security. And I actually got a job in an art gallery. So
Oh, interesting.
mhm. I worked in an art gallery for about a year. It was an internship. And at the same time, I was a barista. And then I got a tattoo apprenticeship and I worked at a tattoo shop for over a year.
So all like super creative kind of different roles. I love it. So
Right.
and was this in another city as well in Northern
This
California?
is, yeah, this was originally in Mountain View, actually.
Oh, okay, yes.
And then, but the job, I worked in San Francisco. I
Yes.
lived in Mountain View and I commuted by, train.
It's like 30 minutes or something, isn't it? If you go, it's
I think
in the
it's,
Bay Area, right?
yeah, it's in the Bay Area. I think it's more like 40 minutes to an hour. I can't
Okay.
remember. I used to commute like wildly long commutes.
So at what point did you feel like the things that you were doing in the kind of artist circles, at what point did you think, oh, I should look at this butchery option? Did it just like suddenly appear on your horizon at some point?
Well, so my whole family is into food. So my brother is a CDC, a chef de cuisine, and my sister's a pastry chef. So
Okay.
we're a very like food centric family. And this butcher shop opened up. I was looking for a job. I just like couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And this butcher shop, the Fatted Calf, was opening up a brick and mortar in Hayes Valley in San Francisco. And my mom's like, "Why don't you apply? Like that would be really fun. That'd be something interesting to do." So I did. I applied as soon as I graduated in 2010. They didn't read my resume or anything. And then I guess I never got a call back. And then a few years later, I got fired from Whole Foods and I was looking for a job because I still was doing like menial labor because it's just being an working artist, you just don't make any money. So I applied again. I think this was 2013
Okay.
and I got the job there. And that is where I learned how to butcher. And I did it because just for the love of food, there wasn't really I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to become a butcher now.
Hmm. It's
Um,
just something that's
yeah.
like your whole family is kind of comfortable with that
hmm
world, right? So,
Exactly.
and the Fatted Calf is a pretty well known butchery there, right? It's like a,
It is.
okay, that's cool.
Yes.
I did a
Yeah.
little bit of research. Yeah, go on.
Did you?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I looked it up after you said, and it seems like there's a
Yeah.
whole thing. They kind of set up another place just out of town as well, right? I think.
Yes, they have the Napa location
Hmm.
still, and actually the place I work no longer exists, but I think they have something in the Ferry building now. But they've written cookbooks, various cookbooks in the charcuterie. They wrote a jerky book. Taylor and Champagner are very talented. They have like a breadth of work that's beyond butchery. It's all very heavily focused on charcuterie, and they're really good at it.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's also interesting, and we talked about this a little bit before, but I love the transition from working a lot in sculpture in you as you're studying,
hmm
the world of, artist expression, I guess is I'm not expressing myself very clearly there. But yeah,
Yeah.
working in kind of shape and uh understanding like physical form, I guess, in a way, and like having a
hmm
good understanding of that, that must have felt like it gave you some kind of advantage working in the world of butchery. It's
Yeah.
almost like one is creating and one is taking away, but does that make sense?
No, it does actually. I mean, so because it's a reductive process, and my background, I did a lot of anatomical work, so
Hmm.
I understood the human anatomy very well, which then informed my ability to understand animal anatomy because it's very similar. Um, we're just bipeds versus quadruped animals. So I was able to, I feel quickly be able to understand the anatomy pretty fast. I'd say I was decently proficient in butchery by 2 years into working in the industry.
Yeah. And
So
you said 2 years you felt like you were, at a competent level.
yeah,
How long were you working at the fatted calf for?
I worked there, I think 3 to 4 years. Four
Okay.
years? I was 4 years. I started out as, just a grunt, and then I ended up becoming the one of the managers there.
I like the term grunt.
Yeah. Just like, like you would do like the menial labor. Like you're really like you're doing counter service, you're cleaning.
Okay. I was
I
imagining,
wasn't butchering at first.
oh, okay. I was imagining like you
Yeah.
get the task of standing next to the hand grinder and you just have to stay at the back. That's what I was imagining.
Oh yeah.
But
I mean, you do have to do stuff like that, but it's not hand though. It's electric.
so like, maybe that's saved for like punishment for people who've been
Yeah,
naughty.
exactly. But no, I mean, the stuff they did there it's interesting too, because craft butchery is very different than what you're gonna do at like Safeway, for instance,
Yes.
which is can box in, box out. So all the primals are already broken down, they're already boned out, and you're just cutting them into steaks. This is a whole carcass
Mm-hmm.
that you're cutting into that you're then cutting down. So it was really different experience than a lot of people I know that told me they were meat cutters had versus this whole craft butchery. And we had no bandsaw. Everything was done with by hand. Like so with a hacksaw or all
Wow.
that stuff. Yeah.
But I can imagine that gives you a much better understanding then of how the whole process works. You,
Right. It 100%.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I have another question.
Yeah.
How? Okay, you move. I imagine this is just like a curiosity thing for me, really. But
Yeah.
when you made the switch over, and you kind of grew up very much or like spent a few years very much in like an artist community. How did your friends you're gonna have like a whole group of friends who are like artists?
Hmm.
How did they respond to the idea of you butchering animals? Was there any kind of interesting or funny reactions from people, or were they all just supportive?
I think they were really supportive. I mean, San Francisco is a very eclectic, at least was a very eclectic place where people are open to all sorts of things. And I mean, it's funny too, because I feel like most of my friends have always been vegetarians,
Yeah, that's what I.
even in,
Yeah,
yeah, even in high school. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, they think they thought it was cool because it's just such a lost art. It's not something that people generally can do these days. So I think that they were more interested in the craft practice of it than thinking about it as like uh, slaughtering animals.
yes, it is interesting, isn't it? Because there is a feeling. I mean, I guess that's why I asked that question because I was curious. Because
Hmm.
I mean, I've made, I guess, over the last 5 or so years, I also came from a city and moved to kind of a more rural environment, and have been fishing and hunting with a bow and processing animals. And yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's interesting to see how people react. And a number of people I know who are like vegans or vegetarians
Hmm.
often react in a far more positive or open way than I
You'd
expect.
expect.
Oh yeah, I would have
Hmm.
expected. Yeah, that was curious because I thought that people were going to have a there'd be
Yeah.
particularly vegans and vegetarians were going to have a problem, but so far everyone's at least to my face.
Yeah, I mean, well, honestly, I would say that the people that I have the most negative reactions to what I do are people that actually eat meat.
Really?
People who eat meat but then are disgusted by the process. I've come about I've met more of those people than I have with vegans that were hating what I did,
Really?
which is so yes, which I never thought would be a thing. But yeah, people are they want it in the styrofoam package wrapped in plastic and they don't want to know where it comes from. And they want it to be boneless and yeah.
That's so interesting. That's really surprising. I really,
Hmm.
yeah, I wonder what that is. I guess it's something which hunters are often, aware of and kind of complain about as well, that there is just a complete detachment from
It is.
the fact that meat is a living creature, and it's not always pleasant, and well, it's never pleasant, but like the taking of a life
No.
is like it's a significant thing, but people
Yeah.
don't want to think about that at all.
No, they want to be detached from it, like, and to such a degree that they want to pretend that it's not what it is. I
Yeah.
don't know. I that's why I enjoy like working with people or talking to people that actually have killed animals themselves because they understand more than anybody what is going on. It's not just, you know, a shapeless thing that suddenly shows up in your grocery store refrigerator.
Yeah.
you
Yeah, you
know?
just mindlessly put it in your cart without any thought whatsoever
Yeah,
as to
that's
what it is.
definitely, yeah, and that is a thing.
Yeah, and it's probably a bit extreme, but I have kind of started to harbor a feeling, which I guess I haven't really shared with anyone
Yeah.
until now. But it does feel a bit like it. You have to, if you want to eat meat, you have to kind of be prepared to take the life of an animal. I don't know if that's
hmm
maybe that's not, that's just my personal opinion. I don't say that's what everyone has to do, but yeah, it just feels like for me to be honest to myself,
Yeah.
if I want to eat those things, then that's kind of the process that I have to acknowledge. And I will admit, like the first animal I took was a bear, and that was kind of tough. And I think we talked about this before in a previous conversation, but
Yes.
but
Yes.
that's a bear. Once you take the hide off, definitely has
hmm
quite a human form.
Right.
And that was definitely took a bit of getting over for me at first, however many years ago it was. But I got over it pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say even the first time I walked into a slaughterhouse, and I've been at that point, I had been butchering animals for 10 years before I actually went to one. And
Mm.
I remember being kind of nervous. And I remember that because everyone was warning me, they were like, just so you know, the way they set up slaughterhouses is you go through the end process before you get to the beginning.
Mm.
So you see the primals being broken down, and then you finally see the carcasses, and then you see them breaking the carcasses, and then you go through the freezer, and then you finally get to the beginning of the line where they do the slaughter, and the temperature changes. It's like all of a sudden it's room temp, and it feels like a shock to your system. And then
Ah,
there's the barnyard smell, and at first I was like, I got a little like squeezy, and then
yeah.
you get to the beginning of the line, and then you see the in this instance it was a cow in a knocker box that was about to get stunned, and then they fall out, and then you see them like seize a little and then get hoisted up, and it happened very fast, but I remember it happened in slow motion when I was watching it,
Mm.
and it was kind of a shock to the system at first, but then once you see it you kind of become desensitized, and it's just part of the process.
Did you go? Was that the only time that you went to see that process, or did you go multiple times?
The only other time I've only gone to a slaughterhouse once, but I've seen farm kills many times,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
which is completely different because it's so much more intimate
Mm-hmm.
um than the slaughterhouse because it's just so like industrialized. Their station, and with farm kills, it's just much more organic. Um,
That does make a lot of sense. I haven't seen the process that you were talking about, in a processing place, but it definitely seems like it would be in some way far more like mechanized and
mhm.
yeah, I don't know. There's got to be something a little bit more intimidating about that as a place, kind of mechanized
Right.
process of taking lives and churning through,
hmm
versus I guess it is a bit more of a like connection with the animal, isn't it? Especially if it's someone, processing or killing an animal that they've farmed for however long, beforehand.
Right. And they have like a personal connection to it. And I mean, it usually has a name.
Yeah.
It's just, and then, it all is done on the property. It's whatever. I mean, I've seen a lot of pigs get killed on farms. So, they get everything done kind of in the same place where it gets shot, just maybe like a few feet away
Yes. So
or stunned.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of is what it is, and you definitely get, yeah. As with anything, right? Like
Yeah.
you have like a process of getting used to it, and then it becomes kind of normal. I mean,
Right.
I remember it's surprising how I've probably told this story before, but I was hunting pigs when I was in South Africa. And my wife is South
Okay.
African, so we lucky enough get to spend a bit of time over there. And I was with a hunting guide hunting wild boar there, and yeah, it was just surprising because I was relatively new to hunting at that point, and I shot a pig with a bow, and we
Hmm.
and some for some reason pigs are very able to they're just like fighters, man. It's like sometimes you can
Yeah.
shoot them and it's like a perfect shot, like a double lung shot with a bow.
Hmm.
Should mean that they, yeah, you can't always guarantee these things, but should mean that they are down and out very quickly. But this one we left it for a while and tracked the blood and went through that whole process, which
Hmm.
was great because I was learning how to track blood and all that stuff. And it was
Right.
probably half an hour we found the pig, and it hadn't like passed at that point, but it was like still trying to get up and then kind of getting down and getting up, and it was like this moment where
Wow.
for me it's pretty, that's a pretty hectic thing to see, like the
Yeah.
beginning of the whole hunting thing, and you're like, wow, this is intense. And I
Hmm.
think my hunting guide, who was a woman, I look over and she's like almost giggling at this point, like, wow, wow, how much have you seen?
Yeah, seriously. Probably a lot, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I guess you just get cold to it. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, I
That's a
digress.
struggle. That's a struggle to see that for your first hunting experience. But then at least if you see that, then you're prepared for every other one you do.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
So anyway, we've kind of gone all over the place a little bit now.
I
we
know, sorry.
couldn't. No, it's not your fault. I just
Yeah.
couldn't resist the the directions that we were going with this conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we'll go back to like you were at the Fatted Calf and you were there for
Hmm.
like 3 or 4 years. And was that
Hmm.
like that? You said it took a couple of years before you felt like you were kind of like at a good level of competency. But
Hmm.
what was the process like? Was it intense?
No, unlike some apprenticeships, this was a working apprenticeship. So they were teaching me how to butcher while I was also getting paid to do my job. So it
Okay.
was kind of when I had time, when I had finished all my tasks, I would uh, get to be on the block and cut meat. The first thing I learned how to break, I believe, was lamb.
Okay.
And so it was just basically just learning how to hold a knife the right way because there's a butcher's grip that you will execute where you actually turn the knife over and cut down. And
So
that was,
can you talk through
yeah,
that a bit more? I don't know if you.
yeah, yeah. So I think that was the biggest thing about butchery is how you hold your knife.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people have a tendency to cut in a chef's way where you hold the knife with your pointer finger and your thumb and cut down. But in fact, what you want to do is you want to make a fist and turn the blade down like you're stabbing something. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how, and then drag towards your body or really away from your body towards like maybe depending on what hand you use, but away from your body to the right or left. Um, and that's a butcher's grip. And that's actually how you have the most control when you're doing boning work.
Okay, that's fascinating. So, what would the negative be of the chef's grip that you mentioned before?
You have way less control because you end up using your wrist more, and that will become a weak point, and then you just won't have the ability to have the energy really to continue. It's all about like how you use your body when you butcher.
Hmm.
Um, I think that that's part of the finesse. And also it'll give you the longevity to be able to stand for hours and do something that's repetitive.
Right. Because if you're working as a butcher, you're going to be processing a lot of meat. Then you've got to be
Hmm.
able to. It's got to be sustainable.
Exactly. And I do think that the grip holding it that way tends to have because you have more control, there's a lot less uh, cut marks into the meat. So therefore, it looks like a cleaner cut. You're able to make much rather than jagged little cuts,
Mm.
which I tend to see, especially with hunters. I tend to see it's obvious that they're using the tip of their knife and they're holding it the other way because the meat is just so like jagged and ripped up, I guess.
I can definitely relate to that. I'm seeing it in my
Yeah.
head now. There are definitely jagged cuts.
Uh-huh. And there's ways of doing it. And also, I mean, the other thing too, you also learn is you don't always have to use a knife. A lot of the time, there's the fascia will hold muscle groupings together, and you can actually just use your bare hands and rip it from the bones or other connective parts of the meat. You don't even need a knife in some instances.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's a big one.
Okay, because I do definitely. It's like I guess it almost relates like if you're moving through the forest, don't try and go through the bushes because that's not going to work. You've got to take the little trails that are already there that the animals have created. In a way,
That
the fascia is kind of
Yeah, that's
that.
a great way of explaining it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely I do try to do that. Like I probably do more cutting than I should, but yeah, because I have butchered my own animals, admittedly, probably not very well,
It's okay. You're
but
not alone.
but yeah, slicing through those fascia and just pulling all the different segments, it seems a lot tidier than just trying to hack through stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, just follow it. Really, the key to it is just following the bones as closely as you can. So just
Yes,
having the one side of the knife hitting the major part of the skeleton, predominantly the spine. And if you're doing that, you're probably not going to gouge any of the muscle groups.
yes. Okay, so I think I'm not trying to think what we should do. Maybe we should just jump fully into this kind of thing. But I'm also
Yeah.
curious about like so did the fatted calf do stuff with wild game as well? Or was that
No, they didn't do anything with wild game. Actually, San Francisco has a law against it.
oh really?
So you can't process, you have to be grandfathered in. So there's actually a place in Northern California called Buds, and they can process game or like places in Sacramento where I currently live, there they can process game, but there's a stipulation where you can't process game in San Francisco in the itself. You have to be grandfathered in.
Interesting.
So we didn't do any game. We only did animals that were raised on farms and then processed through the USDA.
Yes. Okay. So when did the wild game butchery start then? Because I'm guessing it's obviously very similar
Mm-hmm.
principles. You're just transferring over from farm animals to wild game.
It actually started when I had my son. I couldn't work at a butcher shop anymore
Mm,
because I couldn't work full time. And I just thought, well, why not see if I can make a make a living doing exempt work from my house. Because it's custom exempt because it's just getting given back right to the person that killed it. So I don't have to go through any kind of like USDA inspections.
oh,
So
okay. Is
mhm.
that what that means? Exempt. Sorry, I don't know the language.
Yeah, so exempt work is exempt from inspection. So there's a lot of butcher shops that do that. So Bud's that I mentioned prior to the earlier is an example of that. So they do custom exempt. So the hunter brings in their deer, for instance, and then they butcher it to their specs and give it right back to him. It's
Okay.
not getting sold to the general public. It's his property.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess that makes it a bit simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So I started doing that, and yeah, just because I wanted to continue butchering, but I couldn't really go back to the shop
Hmm.
because I had to watch my son. So he would just lay in his you know, little nappy thing, and I would just butcher animals in the kitchen.
Nice.
Yeah, but I bought very professional equipment. I'm not just doing it on a kitchen table. I bought a butcher block, and I have a professional refrigeration unit and deep freezer, and
Sweet.
I have the whole setup.
That's cool. So
Hmm.
basically, you're just like geared to go, and that's how you operate now. Like you have
Hmm.
everything going, and Yeah, you can just like,
Yeah,
that's great.
I can do basically, I still use a handsaw. I don't do anything with a bandsaw because I just don't have one. But also, it's completely unnecessary because game animals, I don't get them in complete carcasses because the way the hunters that I've had a relationship with break them off so they can carry them into their pack. So they're pulling off the back strap, they're pulling off the hind quarters, they're pulling off the shoulder from the actual carcass
Mm.
because they're going out and then putting it in their pack and walking for miles.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Which is
So
what you're supposed to do.
yes, but some people who hunt locally for deer, for instance, will just bring the whole deer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I this is kind of for better or for worse. For some reason and actually I realized because I listened to a podcast beforehand, a long one I listened to quite a while ago. It was with a meat scientist,
yeah,
and that was quite interesting. If you've got thoughts on this as well, I'd love to hear them. But they were
sure.
saying about like aging meat, and the
Hmm.
whole process of aging. I'd love to pick your brains about that,
Yeah.
if that's something that you guys were doing. But leaving muscle on the bone is a much better
Hmm.
way to age meat because if you cut it all up, then it doesn't have anything to
Yes.
stop it from contracting, and then it becomes tougher. You know?
Yeah. And also, I mean, I actually do know a lot about this. I worked in a meat processing plant. I still do, but I
Okay.
worked in another one in Oakland, and we dry age meat there, and that's kind of like. But I've dry aged meat in at the fatted calf, starting all the way then to now. But dry aging meat, yes, it'll contract more, so and it'll lose much more water,
Okay.
and you're exposing all sides to air, so there's so much more loss
Hmm.
because you have to cut that bark, that's what it's called, on the outside away
That's like
because
the crusty stuff that
mhm.
gets the.
It's like jerky essentially because it's completely dried out, and that's not really edible, and it tastes bitter.
Hmm.
So you don't want to eat that. So if you do it on the bone, you have a much better chance of having a better yield because you're going to have 20 to 30% moisture loss if you even just leave it on the bone.
Hmm.
But if you have, I've seen people do it boneless cuts and they lose probably 50% of the product.
Just water evaporating out of it.
Exactly.
That's crazy. So,
Yeah.
okay. So I actually more as a function because I don't have temperature controlled space here,
Hmm.
you know, which is I think
Yeah.
probably common for most hunters.
Yeah.
I just done wet aging. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
where
Of
you,
course.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
and
just a
that
vacuum sealed bag.
exactly, and that's worked really
Yeah.
really well for me. You can just keep it in a cooler or whatever, keep it regulated at the right temperature for a good long time, and it's great.
Yeah. Wet aging is modern industrial aging. So, like, that's how everybody in the game does it. They vacuum seal everything in either dip cryo or in a vacuum seal a chamber, and that sits for months. I mean, months.
What's dip cryo? It sounds cool.
Dip Dip cryo is the type. So there's a whole world of industrial packing. And dip cryo is basically where you have something in the same kind of vacuum seal bag essentially that you would use for the chamber vacuum, but it's in water. So it pushes all the oxygen out and it completely it's hermetically sealed.
Yes. Okay.
Because you know how sometimes you can get air pockets
Yes.
in the vacuum seal? This basically eliminates that. And then it's just completely sealed.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's
next
rad
level.
machine. Yeah, it's like the industrial equipment. I think that was my interesting part because I worked at this place called Cream Co. And that was kind of my first introduction to the whole industrial meat packing industry. And that place started out as this when I was working there, it's just 80s really rudimentary machinery to they have a full rail now and a roll stock machine, which is little pockets where you put the ground beef in and the ground meat in, and then just roll another piece of plastic on top. You know, you see those little square packaging that has like ground beef in it. That's roll
Hmm.
stock. So just
Oh.
now they're just light years away from where they were when I started with them.
Ah. It's
But the
interesting.
machinery, I got a whole awakening with machinery and learned how to operate huge industrial grinders with lifts and all of this Gemini grinders, and yeah, all sorts of things that I was never exposed to in craft butchery.
Okay, that's cool. Probably good
Yeah.
to have the craft butchery knowledge, right? And all that
Hmm.
understanding, and then know what things to like leave behind and what things to keep, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that every job I've had has informed the next.
Hmm.
Everything has.
Okay, so I would love to ask the kind of process actually before the animal gets to you. I'd love to talk through
Hmm.
some of that stuff. And you've already
Yeah.
mentioned a little bit about knife work,
Hmm.
but like I guess obviously, and I should kind of caveat that there's probably different rules for different animals as well, because I know, and maybe there isn't, maybe it's all the same, but like at least with deer, is it ungulates? Is that the term? Like versus
Hmm.
things like bear, I think that there's some kind of slightly different things in terms of timing and the meat and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, one's wearing a giant furry blanket, so that's gonna
Right.
change. That's gonna change things. But so I guess like first of all, what's best practices in general for like us, like how much time is too much time, things like if
Yeah.
there's like if you're taking the guts out and stuff, if you like nick the gut, what's the best practice there, or like is that the end of the world, or what if it's a gut shot, that kind of stuff. Do you
Right.
do you even take animals if they've been gut shot, like stuff like that?
Yeah.
I just asked you a bunch of questions, so we can go through that again.
Yeah. Well, I'll start I guess the beginning as far as temperature. So temperature, I mean, it really depends obviously on what temperature is outside. If you're in the winter,
Hmm.
obviously you're in refrigeration, so you don't have to worry about time. It's not of the essence. Versus the 90-degree days. I would say actually anything like 50 and up is when you start having to have cooling concerns. But there's a myriad of things you can do to chill your meat, whether it be you carry a dry pack full of dry ice,
Hmm.
or check your terrain and see if where you're hunting has a creek,
Yes.
and you could chill your meat near the water source.
Yes.
Uh, or if you can even just bring ice packs, that's really heavy though. Or have ice in a cooler at your vehicle where you're eventually going to store your meat, like a big cooler with ice. That's the best case. I think that's the easiest way because then you don't have to carry anything
And
or
how?
find sources.
Yes, I've actually done not the dry ice thing, which is I've never thought about that. I'm guessing
Yeah,
dry ice is much lighter, so that's good.
it is. Yeah,
Um, so that would be a good thing to have in a cooler. But usually I just have a bunch of ice in my cooler at my vehicle, which might be a few miles
right.
away from the animal. And I have actually done that. I'm glad that you say about cooling something in a creek because I've done exactly that. But I was kind of like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Is this just like you never
I
know?
think I think bringing it down to temperature is more important than um I mean obviously there can be certain things in the water that you
Hmm.
don't know about, but you're going to cook it.
Yes.
So, I mean whatever thing is on it essentially other than like uh you know something that you can't control, like a parasite or something like that,
Yes.
um, it should be able to be cooked off. Because
Yes.
even drinking water sometimes has lead or cadmium or whatnot in it in general.
Okay.
So I would be more concerned about getting the meat down to temperature than putting it in water. It can change the exterior, so it can kind of denature the outside, if you don't have it in a waterproof bag. So I would definitely say, because a lot of hunters put their meat in like cotton bags and things like that, I would say put it in a waterproof bag and then put it in the water. So that way you don't have it exposed to it, but it'll at least bring it down to temperature, which would be
Oh,
below 40 degrees.
okay. So I just like threw the thing in the water, like
Yeah,
no bag, nothing, just a carcass straight in there.
right. So I would not do that because only because it's going to alter the flavor.
And in what way?
So it denatures the meat. So it actually changes it chemically so that it tastes different. It kind of takes away a lot of its like natural, the way the blood mixes with the water, and it
Okay.
actually changes the color if you notice. Like it'll get lighter in color.
The way in which I did that before was it's like a full just it's literally just gutted out. So the only thing
Hmm.
exposed is like the cavity inside the ribs. You know,
Right.
everything
Yeah.
else is covered in fur. So I'm guessing that's not going to be the same issue.
No, it's not gonna be the same issue. If
Okay.
that's like basically if you're doing it that way, then of course, it has it's protected by its coat,
Okay, cool. Okay,
right?
good.
I'm talking about just cut meat.
Okay, good. I can sigh
Yeah.
give a sigh of relief.
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. That's okay.
No,
Yeah.
that's good. Okay, cool. So, but obviously, if it's all broken down, then putting that in the water is going to be that's going to change it. Okay.
The only reason I say that is because sometimes it's easier. Maybe you're not anywhere near a water source, but you have to carry what you have to a water source. Therefore, you break it down prior to getting there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, stupidly, I've taken to tying my deer to like a stick and carrying it.
Oh, that's a good idea,
As I go,
though.
it is,
Yeah.
except it's like
Yeah.
120 pounds or
So,
something.
yeah, it's so heavy. Yeah.
Which oh yeah, that's not always the wisest thing for my spine. I'm sure I'm going to pay the
Yeah,
price.
for sure.
Pay
Maybe
the
have go hunting with a partner so they could carry the other side.
Yeah, yeah. That did
Yeah,
actually
just
happen
for that.
couple
Yeah.
a couple of weekends ago. That was a nice perk, I have to say. It felt like a third of the effort when you've got someone else to help
Right.
you. It's
Oh,
so good.
oh, for sure.
Okay, so getting it down to temperature is the most important
Hmm.
thing, okay? But also, okay, if you know you're gutting and you nick the guts a little bit,
Hmm.
what's the best procedure with that? Do you wash it out or do you just leave it? Like what would you say is the best thing to do?
I would say wash. It depends on how extreme it is. If you nick like the intestines and the fecal matter starts to spill out, it technically contaminates the meat. So I would wash it out as quickly as you can. So bringing water is always key, I think, because you don't want to because there's bacteria in there, which then will contaminate the actual meat itself.
Yes. And that can travel,
So,
right? Like it can actually
mhm.
permeate through the meat to some extent. Is that right?
Yeah, like burrow into it,
Wow.
um, because the bacteria is alive, and even though the animal is dead, it can go into the tissue. So I would just rinse it off as quickly as you can. But the other good thing too is, make sure when you're gutting, make sure that you have the blade turns towards you, not
Yes.
towards the guts. I mean, that probably goes without saying, but
No, no,
just
it's
having good knife skills, I think, and knowing how to get up there correctly
mm,
will eliminate that from even being a possibility. Unless you shoot the guts, and then that's a whole nother story,
it is one that happened recently for my friend.
really. And then there's not a lot of recourse.
Yeah. What's the situation there? Like, is it like the inside of the cavity? I mean, it was a pretty. I mean, this is yeah for sensitive listeners. Maybe this is a
Yeah.
moment where you don't want to hear, but yeah, the shot went through the back ham and
Okay.
came out like mid rib on the other side, and so the
Yeah.
guts. I mean, uh, bless him, the guy that I was hunting with, it's his first big animal, first big game animal. So
Oh,
there's all that excitement and everything, and I'm trying to
right.
teach him like okay, we're going to cut open the carcass and everything, and teach him the same thing you was just saying, where you can get your fingers in. So I'm just jogging the mic, get
Yeah.
your fingers in and like cut away from the guts and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and he's. I showed him just a tiny bit, and then he did it a little bit, and then just nicked the intestine just the tiniest bit. But what we hadn't figured out at that point was that a 7 millimeter Magnum bullet had gone right through the the intestine.
Right.
So as he then cut it further, the whole thing was just it
Exploded.
was just a complete crime scene in there. So he thought that tiny nick in the guts was like the product of
Oh,
the
oh, no,
product of
no,
like
no.
the shit explosion that he then experienced. And it's like, what? I didn't think I did it that wrong. I'm like, no,
Right,
no, no,
right.
this is not you. This is not you. Well,
Yeah,
it was the shot, but it wasn't the knife work.
yeah.
So
I would say, yeah.
yeah. How do you salvage that?
Uh,
Is there a way to salvage that? Like, I mean, we washed it out
mhm.
with like a few like liters, probably like a gallon of water,
Yeah,
but there is a lot of contamination going on in there. So, uh,
yeah.
is it kind of like the ribs obviously, and the tenderloins inside, you're just gonna lose.
Hmm.
You're just gonna lose that and throw it away.
I would just out of safety precaution. But nothing is guaranteed bad, I feel like. I mean, even if you have an animal that's been out of temp for too long or some sort of exposed to something, you don't know. That's the issue. It's like you don't know whether or not it's gone bad. It's just a risk
Yes,
because
and
there's no way. The only way to know is to take it to a lab and test it,
yes, absolutely. Or
which you could do.
try it and cross your fingers.
Yeah, that too. I mean, listen, I've done that before. I've taken the risk because I was like, well, it's been out of refrigeration for this long, but it's probably okay. Like, you know, I mean, I've eaten bacon that I left in my backpack overnight and lived to tell the tale. So, but I mean, it's all just it's about risk, really. You want to mitigate risk. So I'd say if you don't want to do that, then yes, I would toss it. But if you're willing to see if you get food poisoning, then
Yes,
you can do
you can roll the
that.
dice.
Yeah, you can roll the dice. I mean, a lot of animals have things in it that you can't even see, right? Like 157H7 is the most deadly form of E. coli. You can't taste it or smell it, but it exists in a lot of animals,
Hmm.
or trichinosis in wild pigs, or
And
bears,
bears, yeah.
yeah, it can be there. It's mostly for that, and the way to mitigate that is just to cook it well done,
Mm-hmm.
right? So cook it past what I prefer to eat meat at.
Yes.
So, which is why a lot of the time those types of things get, versus having like beautiful steaks, you end up cutting it into grind or sausage because you have to cook it so thoroughly. You
Yeah.
can also get it tested for those things too.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's like just adapting to that sort of thing. It doesn't
Hmm.
doesn't bother me. Like I got a bear a few years ago and started really using like crock pot recipes and things like that. And
Right.
it's maybe even my fantastic, maybe even my favorite meat because it's just so good. Like you put that bear in there and
Right.
make like a pie, I think I have a Guinness and porcini pie recipe
Oh
that
wow.
I adapted from beef, and it's just knockout,
Yeah.
and
Well, and also their muscles are all very worked in general. So cooking it for a long time is gonna break down all that collagen anyway.
okay, cool. So right, like, I need to
Yeah.
like so what? Okay, we've gone through like that process of getting the animal cool, making sure that you're kind of damage limitation in terms of if you like just be super careful with the knife work.
Hmm.
Is there um I'd say like you're saying about time. I know this is a very, obviously I'm not going to quote you officially on this, but like it really depends on what temperature you're in right now or, when you're hunting. But like, for instance, where you are right now, it's hot, hot, right? Like in
Right. It's very
Sacramento,
hot.
it's
Hmm.
like 90 something degrees.
Hmm.
How much time, for instance, like I shot a buck. The first buck I shot this year was like early on because it was like opening weekend of archery season in California,
Hmm.
which is a zone, and that was early July, So
Yeah.
and it was like at 10 o'clock in the morning. I shot the thing. So by the time I strung it up, had it on my shoulder, and carried the whole thing out probably 3 miles. Um, that's a few probably 2.5, 3 hours
Yeah.
that it's starting to warm up. Like temperature wise, it actually was thankfully quite a cool day. And I've eaten the
Yeah.
meat. I've eaten the meat and it's fine.
Right.
and,
Right.
but is there a kind of point where you feel how much time in that situation? Say it's 75 degrees.
Hmm.
How much time do you think like alarm bells should start going off? It's also a full carcass. It's
Yeah.
not broken down.
Yeah. Of course. Well, so it's exposed to less oxygen when it's a full carcass. So I think you have even more time because
Oh, really?
if it's exposed to the air, if you have all that hot air pressing against every piece of it versus it being completely intact, Obviously with its guts taken out because that will spoil it faster.
Yes.
But you want to take that out first thing when you gut it anyway. The gutting
Yeah.
is the first part of the process anyway. But I think it'll have less of a chance of rotting as it sits than it being broken into pieces and being exposed to extremely hot temperatures. In some
Yes.
ways, I guess the idea is obviously when you do break it down, the air will circulate, and if it's a lot of cold air, it'll cool down faster, but it'll
Mm.
also spoil faster too if
Um.
it's in exposed to the opposite temperature.
Okay. Because it's curious. I guess there's like a balance, isn't there, in my mind about
Yeah,
the animal is warm and you want to get that heat escaping as quick as
off of
possible.
it. Yeah,
So it's like really depends on if the. I mean, I guess the temperature is probably going to be most of the time cooler than the animal. I'm just kind of talking out loud here.
yeah, no worries. I mean, I think it depends. It's hard to say because
Yeah.
it really, it's all about it's science. So it's all about how the process of it's spoiling. And I mean essentially as soon as something dies, right, the meat starts to go bad. Like
Yes.
it's in the process of, it's in a death process the minute that its heart stops and it's drained of all its blood. And then suddenly, then rigor mortis kicks in, and then it's starting to go naturally bad. What makes it good is when you control that process.
Yeah.
So getting it as getting it below 40 degrees as fast as possible lessens the process of it going bad. So it suspends it from spoiling. That's all the cool down process will do.
Yes.
So the as quickly as you can. I mean, I think I've seen animals that have been killed and out of refrigeration for hours, like 5, 6 hours,
Mm.
and whole carcass, gutted, and then split. And
Okay.
it's been okay. It hasn't been too hot. I'd say it was around 60, 70 degrees in those conditions.
Yes.
I think if you're in 90-degree heat, you're going to be working against the clock because just of how hot it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I
So
think that, yeah,
so it's a thing to think about. If you're in hot temperatures, you've got to like think about pulling the trigger or taking a shot with a bow. You're like, what's the
early in the
aftermath?
morning. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, I guess. And I
It's
guess
hard.
it's
Yeah, it's hard to say.
no, I mean it's so many factors, right? Like
Hmm.
so forgive me for trying to like pin you down pin you
No,
down on
I
that
mean,
one.
I've studied a lot about meat science because of me working in processing specifically. If you need to know, and I have a HACCP license actually, so you have to know temperatures and you have to know how to mitigate risk, right? Because HACCP is hazard control analysis. So, I mean, I definitely have somewhat. I don't have a degree in it, but I mean, I have somewhat of an understanding of critical control points. And I do think that, it's really just about doing your best to get to the place where you can get it down to the temperature you need it to be. However long that takes, I mean, it really just depends, on how prepared you are for the situation. And I think that that's a big thing with hunters. It's like you have to be prepared. And I notice a lot of the time they're not. They kill a deer and they don't even know how they're going to butcher it. They call the butcher shop and they're like, "Hey, can you take this?" Well, we don't take game. So,
Yeah,
and then there's
yeah.
calling around asking for someone to process their animal. It's like you should call your processor like a week ahead and say, "Do you have space in your intake for a 75-pound deer possibly, because you're going hunting for something, you're going
Yeah.
hunting for a buck or 150 pounds, whatever it be." And if they say yes, okay, oh, I know I can go there this week.
Yeah.
Versus it being like, it's in my trunk. Will you take it? That happens so much. It's kind of incredible. I'm like, why don't you make up a game plan? Like, I know you're not necessarily going to kill something today, but just check,
I love it.
you know?
Literally a game plan.
Yeah, a game plan for your game. I know. But having that is I think the biggest part of hunting. You need to know exactly exactly how you're gonna deal with it once you've killed it.
Yeah, I know it makes absolute sense, but I would hazard a guess that there's an element of superstition as well because I've definitely, I mean,
Okay.
I like process the animals myself, but so I haven't been
Hmm.
in the situation where I'm like, oh no, I have, like a ticking time bomb in the back of my truck, and I need to
Yeah.
go to a butcher. But yeah, I can imagine people might be like, oh, I don't want to like call and check around in case, that's going to curse it and it's not going to happen or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But then you have like this big carcass on your hand and you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's stressful, right? Like it's
Yeah.
definitely stressful.
Yeah.
Um, So, okay, do you like? I mean, obviously, you processing a bunch of wild game for people. Have you got any? Have there been many times where you? This is a two-part question. Where someone
Yeah.
they've been driving around in their truck, and they're like, "Oh, butcher, butcher, I haven't made a plan for this," and
Yeah.
they come to you, and you have to turn it away because you think that it's past the plausible time to process it.
That hasn't happened to me yet, but I would say that the majority of the time, because I have a relationship with my customers at this point, but I
Okay.
would say because it's at my house, it's not at a shop, so it's not like they're just calling me. Like a lot of the time, they'll email me and say I'm going out on a hunt,
Okay.
and I likely this weekend, if I have something, it'll be this weekend. So they are planning ahead. Or sometimes they call me like, you know, that day and they're like, I have this, but it's broken down into pieces, so they're gonna refrigerate it. Can you process it this weekend? But when I
Yes.
worked at butcher shops, that would happen often.
Okay.
So that mostly they would call and like I said, they would say, oh, I have this in my trunk, can you process this right now? And then we'd have to turn them away because we're like, no, we don't have the space for it.
Yeah.
Also, that being said, for custom exempt work, like even if you're going through uh, any kind of butcher shop, it is at your own risk. So if you do have it out for too long, I have no way of knowing, that how long you've had it unless I question it.
Yes.
But I'm not. We as processors aren't guaranteeing that it's spoiled. You have to guarantee that for yourself.
Ah, okay. So you're not really, it's not a case of handing it over, then suddenly it's your responsibility. It's like
Right?
it's
It's
already.
not.
So that's
Yeah,
that's good to know.
yeah. It's the responsibility of That's why it's for the person. That's why it can't be sold to the general public because we have no idea how it was handled.
Yes.
Right?
So is there a way? I mean, it's kind of this follow-up question is maybe a little bit lost the wind in its sails now, possibly because it may not be relevant if it's not exactly your responsibility. Is there ways in which you judge if the meat is okay in an animal? Obviously, smell is a thing, but are there
Hmm.
are there other ways that you judge that? Is there any kind of other thing that is a known? Those are just like the information that you have is how you judge it.
Yeah. I mean, so you could tell if something's spoiled because it'll smell like really terrible. It'll smell like blue cheese.
Really
I've had firsthand experience smelling rotten meat and it is strong. Like it's bad. And there's that old saying, the nose knows.
I
Well, it does. Like if something is spoiled, it'll smell off and you won't want to eat it regardless of you know, whether or not you won't want to eat it because the smell is so bad. And this
yeah,
happens with, poultry will smell like just stinky, and beef will smell like straight up blue cheese, and pork will smell sour.
interesting.
So the smell is basically your biggest indication of spoilage.
Okay,
Um, yeah.
good to know.
I mean, and then there's things you want to cut away too. I mean, this is, I guess, a little bit separate, but so say you have a shot in the shoulder,
Yes.
especially if you do archery, and it hits, one of the major arteries in the shoulder, and then there's going to be a huge blood, like explosion of blood inside that muscle.
Mm,
Well, you're going to want to cut away all that bruise.
really?
Yes, you're going to discard that bruise. So what ends up happening is there'll be bone fragments, and this is a learning curve for me too, because obviously when I started butchering, for the most part, animals are entirely intact. There's no exploding bones or blood or things like that, or like there's sometimes bruising, but not a whole lot. But you want to cut away all that bruising because not that it's necessarily going to poison you, but the taste is an off taste.
Interesting. It's that really dark red. Yeah, no, I know
You'll be able to
exactly.
tell it's like jelly like
Yeah, I know exactly what you
and
mean.
dark red. That's all blood and bruising, and you want to cut that all away. You want to trim that away from that animal.
It's yeah, it's interesting because I used like a different kind of tip on my arrow, like a broadhead,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like an expandable one, and I've always used like simple blade broadheads, but that
Mm-hmm.
expandable broadhead, I guess there's pros and cons. The thing is, it's going to make sure that the animal is definitely going to die quickly,
Right.
and you're going to retrieve it. And I mean, the thing barely went 4 or 5 yards. It dropped straight away. But I've never seen anything like it. When I took the hide off, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of that kind of coagulated, gooey, dark
Yeah.
red all across all
Mm-hmm.
the ribs. It took a lot of work cutting all that off.
Yeah,
It
it
was
does.
it was a lot of work, but I'd saved a lot of time. If I was having to track that animal, then that could have been yeah. I'm like,
Another problem. Yeah,
um,
I think you have to like just take the lesser of two evils, I guess, in that sense.
yeah. So I did have another question here, but I think you've already kind of answered it in a roundabout way.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
about like taxidermy stuff. I'm guessing if you have a
Hmm.
relationship, like more of a private relationship with your customers, you tend to get the meat in, process it, and deliver it back. But you don't. It doesn't sound like you get many animals in their hides. Because I was wondering if there's anything you ever do where you take the hide off and then just like ship that over to a taxidermist or something for people.
No. So part of the deal, I guess, is that I don't kill any animals, right? So I do farm stuff, process farm animals for people too. And I don't kill the animals. I refer them to someone who I'm friends with who's also a butcher who does custom exam, who kills animals. And then I also don't do any cape finishing. So I don't cape the animal and pull the hide off. Um,
Yeah.
Mostly for sanitation reasons.
Yes.
And if you take it to any processor, likely they're going to tell you that you also have to do that, that you have to dehydrate it yourself
Oh,
and
okay.
field dress it before you take it to a processor. I think in some instances, maybe they'll make an exception, but from my experience, they're going to ask you to remove it yourself.
That's good to know.
Um, yeah, but mostly for sanitation purposes.
Just because there's
Because
so much mess on that hide, like
and it's
dirt.
dirty. It's just that it's been exposed to everything,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
don't know it could contaminate other animals that the processor is dealing with.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
No, good to know. Okay, so I've got this thing here, like basic rules of butchering, like butchering 101 kind of thing. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
mind talking a bit about that, talking through that process, if someone wants to have a go at doing the thing themselves, or if they, want to do like more of the more basic cuts, I'd love to just pick your brains about that stuff. So, like tools for the
Sure.
job, or like basic,
Mm-hmm.
what is the essential equipment? Like I think knives is a thing, and also like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying about the technique with those knives. But like, what knives are like the essentials, and what are the nice to haves?
I would say it's pretty simple. You really don't need a lot. You just need a boning knife. Um,
Okay.
and depending on the size of your hand, 5 to 6 inch boning knife. Um, and it doesn't need to be expensive. I think there's a lot of marketing out there that makes you think that you do need an expensive knife, but I usually work with knives. They're about $20 to $30, maybe $40,
Hmm.
because you're gonna end up stripping the blade so much that you're gonna have to keep resharpening it, and there's no reason, and it's gonna whittle away quick. So there's no reason to buy something super expensive. So a boning knife, and then maybe like a hand hacksaw in some instances.
Okay. And a hand hacksaw, that's I'm imagining it's like, got like a metal frame over the top and then it's just
Hmm.
like a single blade, right? Like a replaceable part at the bottom. That's a hacksaw,
With the
right?
teeth, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And they make travel ones, which I think for hunters would be a good investment. I don't think that they're that expensive. I have a large one that I use for my processing, but all you really need to do is, if you're not familiar with the anatomy, because there's joint work you can do where you don't even need a handsaw, but For the inexperienced butcher, I would say you could hacksaw probably where the legs off at the spine.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
so it unless you completely bone the whole thing out, which a lot of people do too. But I've told many hunters this before is that if you can leave it bone in, try. If you think you can carry like a bone in shoulder, you should. If you can carry a bone in leg, you should try to do that. I see people bone most of it out. And the
Hmm.
problem too with that can be is it's hard to determine what cuts you can get from that because it's like an exploded mess.
Yes. You don't have the map to.
Exactly. And especially the way some people cut, it's even more difficult to determine. I mean, I can usually figure it out, but I would say just try to leave it bone in. And in that case, then all you need is a boning knife. And that's it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. That's what I do.
Yeah.
That's
You
good to
really don't
hear.
need much. Yeah.
So, you're saying about retouching the blades. Like, I guess you obviously have to have it super sharp before you start, and then do you just use
Yes.
like a sharpening stick, like an iron, to touch it
So
up? What's your process?
yeah. Well, a honing rod, essentially all that does is the blade gets bent the more you use it. So it'll bend to the left or right.
Hmm.
So what a honing rod does is it kind of just helps re-center the edge of the knife. It doesn't actually sharpen it unless you're using diamond, which then does strip some of the metal off.
Hmm.
But what I usually do is I have a Japanese whetstone and I'll sharpen my knives with a Japanese whetstone
As you go.
in the beginning before I cut anything. If my
Okay.
knife needs it, I mean, you could tell you touch the top, and if it feels, you could feel the edge, and if it feels dull, then it's time to just pass it a few times on the whetstone.
Okay. And so then
Hmm.
that will, you pass it over the whetstone, and then you'll be good to go for a while, like
Yeah,
for a few hours. Go
I would
on.
say it just really depends on how heavy duty of work you're doing.
Hmm.
If you're dulling your edge by hitting a lot of bone, uh, like then you're probably gonna have to sharpen it more frequently. Also, the cutting board, strangely enough, that you're using matters. If you're using a plastic cutting board, it actually dulls the edge of your knife faster versus wood
Interesting.
because the wood has give and the plastic doesn't. Plastic actually dulls knives much quicker than people realize. Bamboo is terrible. Don't ever use a bamboo cutting board.
Yeah, no, we that's a good point. Yeah, I never even thought about that. That's so true. Thankfully I use a wooden board, so that's good. But yeah, I
Yeah,
never thought the plastic would do that. But I guess
yeah. Well, and in industrial processing, you have to use it, so those knives go dull so fast.
hmm. Okay. So um, I kind of got an impression for what you were saying before, but like I guess you say you get like a whole carcass. How are you
Hmm.
processing the animal? Do you hang it up, or are you laying it flat on a butcher's table?
I mean, it depends on the environment I'm in. Right now, I don't have a rail system, but I prefer to do hang butchery. When I work in shops, I've done a lot of hang butchery. It's easier for two reasons. If you can set that up in your house, I highly recommend. You just have to make sure you have the T strength in the ceiling that you're hanging the hook on
Yes.
because it will bow the weight will bow it. But it makes it easier because of you're using you're not using your physical what is it you're not exerting yourself physically because the gravity is doing all the work.
Yes.
So, and I'm 5'2".
Okay.
So doing hang butchery is much easier than it is doing table because one, I'm not very tall. So when I'm going over a carcass on a table, I exert a lot more of my physical what's the word I'm looking for? I just exert myself more because I
Yeah.
have such a small stature. So
Yep.
um it's after men who are tall men have an advantage doing table butchery versus doing like hang butchery.
But it's still going to be more work for anyone to, because I know I tend to butcher on a table, And
Yeah.
you're like doing a bit of a juggling, holding a whole leg up, trying to prop it with your shoulder, and like,
Hmm.
you're doing a bit of a dance, so to speak,
Yeah. I
getting
mean,
into
I
spots.
small stuff, it's not a big small animals like, birds, um, or even like lamb. It's or pig, I guess. It's really just beef, I think I'm thinking of is like just so much easier to do hang.
So, a few quick round questions like rubber gloves, obviously
Hmm.
yes, but how often? Like, how often is that thing where you're like changing them over, or what's the kind of? Is there any kind of rules about that, or it's just on gut, like feeling?
No, no. There was a law in California that was passed at one point that said that you did have to use rubber gloves, but that was quickly rejected because you can be completely unsanitary wearing gloves too. It's really just about hand washing.
Okay.
Um, I would say you don't have to wear gloves, it's preference. I like to use gloves like when I clean like poultry, especially chicken, for instance, because there's just so much possibility of a coli. And
Yes.
with that, I change my gloves every single time I touch anything other than the chicken. Like if I were to clean chicken and then I have to go to the sink for something or pick something else up, I'll take my glove off because it's cross contamination.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, beef, they do say that the oils in your hands and the heat can tend to change the composition of the meat too. So, I mean, maybe wearing a glove will also be an advantage for that. But a lot of people butcher barehanded and just wash their hands really frequently.
Yeah. Okay. Good to
I think you
know.
wash your hands more actually when you have no gloves.
Yeah, I think that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Um, and do you ever process turkeys as well? Have you ever worked on turkey?
Yes, I've worked on a lot of turkeys.
And do you follow the same rules with chicken as with turkey, or is it because it's wild, it's a different kind of deal? What about like avoiding E. coli and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think just birds in general, they just are, I don't know, they have like this oozy quality to them. It's really just about me touching it and finding it like kind of, I guess I love poultry, but I'm also turned off by it when I butcher it. So yeah, I use a lot of gloves. I think and I obviously I've, butchered domestic turkey too, that or a turkey that's, grown on farms and stuff, and I treat it the same way.
Hmm. I've got another question, which is something which I've done, and I just want to see if this is something that you kind of approve of. Is
Yeah.
I've at times used when I'm like processing and breaking down the animal, I use like some kind of spray which is like half water, half vinegar, or something like, which is like I think
Mm-hmm.
it's acidic, right?
Yeah.
like an acidic spray, just to give it like a quick coating to, I guess, like create like a barrier for the bacteria. Does that make sense? I think I read that
Yes.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, they're in that's like an organic way of cleaning something, I guess you would say. It's not like a chemical cleaner. So a lot of the time, like in organics, they'll use vinegar, water, cleaner things to clean. So that's, you can still it's still consumable. It's not a poison. So
Yes.
I think that yeah, that's totally I think acceptable and a good practice. It's a very sanitary thing to do.
Perfect. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
This is
also, if you spray half water and vinegar on dry aging meat, you can kind of knock off the bacteria and keep the bacteria from growing in a way that if it's starting to go like blue or something instead of in green versus it being nice and white when you're dry aging or curing meat, putting a half water vinegar thing is a common practice.
okay. And so
Yeah.
that bluey green color, is that something that also happens with wet aging, or is it only dry aging?
Only dry aging. If you have
Okay.
any kind of mold growth and wet aging, it's being exposed to oxygen and you don't want that.
Yeah.
So, because there is an anaerobic and an aerobic environment, aerobic meaning that it's with oxygen and anaerobic without. And the whole point of doing something in wet aging is that it's without oxygen, because
Yes.
oxygen is the enemy of any kind of meat because it's going to create all sorts of bacteria.
Hmm. Okay. Is there kind of general rules about different animals? I mean, I guess if you're butchering, you haven't been necessarily too involved in the aging of wild game. or
No,
okay, so
but
maybe
I think that aging wild game would be no different than doing anything that's raised on a farm.
yes. What's kind of like a good amount of time? Do you know what the kind of principles are? Like, what's considered a
Hmm.
good amount of time to age animals, both in like wet and dry aging?
So I would say for dry aging, a minimum of 30 days
Wow,
is
wow.
when you're going to actually start receiving any kind of benefits. There's naturally occurring enzymes that break down the muscle tissue and tenderize the meat. They create more of an intense flavor, and that can only happen through time. Also, the right humidity and um, lack of moisture, dirt, like it has to be the right center of humidity will, make for the most ideal environment. I believe it's 70 degrees is the perfect humidity for dry aging. Um, you want to have it in an ideal temperature. For wet aging, I believe the industry standard is 60 days
Okay,
in refrigeration. And then from there, you want to freeze it. And then freezing, you can freeze things for however long you want. I recommend 6 months to a year, but
okay. So freezing for too long is what happens then if it's more than 6 months or a year?
it can start to crystallize and you start to lose more water content. And then it just sort of, um, there's shrinkage that happens. It's not necessarily the meat goes bad, it just doesn't taste as optimal.
Yeah.
It's not as optimal in flavor. Because you could freeze something. For instance, I freeze fish when I get it so that I can have it raw.
Okay.
So freezing has benefits. I think people think, oh, I'm gonna freeze it, it's gonna be gross. That's not necessarily true. I think if it's for too long, it can be. You can get freezer burn, it can just lose a lot of moisture because there's purge that happens when you defrost something, and all that is escaped moisture that was inside the muscle.
Okay. Interesting. And is there with freezing stuff? I tend to just turn my freezer down to like the absolute maximum cold. Is that good
Yeah.
practice? I mean, does it not? I
Yeah.
guess it doesn't make any difference once you're below a certain level, or is it just good to be as cold as possible?
I think as cold as possible. I mean, even when you're like butchering meat, if you can be in a cold environment, that's good too, because then you're keeping the meat as cold as possible,
Yeah.
so there's no spoilage happening. A lot of people butcher in cold rooms.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I try to
Hmm.
butcher early in the morning when it's still cold.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That makes absolute sense. So I've got another question. This is a bit of a fast round. Sorry, I've got all these little things that have been
No,
like
that's
in
fine.
my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Um, so silver skin and fat on
Hmm.
venison, that kind of
Hmm.
situation, like silver skin, is that something you should just always just take off as much as you can? So like for instance on a back
Hmm.
strap, there's like a huge long piece
Hmm.
of silver skin there.
Hmm.
That's a case of flipping it upside down, with the
Like a
skin
fish, yeah.
skin on the ground, skin on the not the ground. That's not how we.
On the table. On the table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just like sliding that blade under to get the silver skin away. Is it? It's
Hmm.
definitely a necessary thing to do with
Yes.
as much as possible.
Yes, because especially in backstrap, because it's a tender piece of meat
Mm.
and the silver skin is chewy. There's no way to really break it down, especially since you're not cooking it for a very long time. So it's not going to render or it's not going to break down in any way. Not that it really would anyway. It'll always remain kind of tough.
Okay, even aging.
So yeah, I would always, well, yeah, aging, you still want to cut it away.
Okay.
I mean, you keep it on there to age, but once it's done aging, you still want to cut it away.
That's like an important detail. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if you were gonna age the backstrap, I would try to leave it bone in. So I'd try to keep the spine attached to it, and you don't necessarily need the ribs, but at least that feather bone on the back when you split it down the center,
Mm.
keep it bone in so there's more, it's protected because that's going to, it's a lean piece of meat. So it's, if you dry age it, it's gonna just wither down into nothing if it doesn't have like some sort of bone to protect it.
So that's going to stop it from contracting too much.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Exactly.
But if you're
Exactly.
wet aging, it's not so necessary because it's not going to lose all the moisture and contract the same way.
Right. Exactly. It's a completely different process. So, before you eat it, always remove the silver skin. And venison fat just tastes sort of foul. I don't know. It has like I think that's more of like a taste thing more than anything else.
Like a personal preference of flavor.
Exactly. Like when I grind meat for deers, unless usually I just grind it as is because most hunters are purists and they don't want to add anything to it. But for personal consumption, I would add fat, like beef fat to it or pork fat
Yes. Yeah,
because I like it not so lean, but
it makes complete sense. I mean, I've taken quite a lot of animals over in South Africa, and often I get butchers to process the meat there, and that's
hmm
very standard procedure there. They have some very good sausages, which are a mixture of
yes.
beef, pork, and wild game all together.
hmm
Um, and that's they often bring fats in from other animals. But I've got to confess, I actually quite like the taste of venison fat.
Do you like it? Okay, I don't know.
Yeah,
Some people hate it, so it's really that's what I mean. It's just a matter of
it's
taste,
definitely
I
a
think.
mouthfeel thing as well, right? Like, because it's
hmm
pretty thick, like quite dense in your mouth. So
hmm
that might be why people don't like it. I can understand it. But from a flavor point of view, I think the first buck I ever got had a lot more fat than the other ones. Like, it had like an inch thick or more
Yeah.
fat on its like hind quarters, and
Oh well.
I took some of it off.
Yeah.
But if anything, it kind of tastes just like fatty lamb does.
Lamb has a lot of lanolin in it, which makes it has that greasiness,
Yes.
and it's that same quality, and a lot of people don't like that.
Ah, okay.
Um, yeah, I don't love it either. I don't even like lamb fat, to be honest with you, because of that greasy mouthfeel.
Hmm. Yeah.
But like I said, it's a matter of taste.
It's
You
a
know, some people love it, some people don't.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I've got one question, like a couple of small things, like small little questions that I was just curious about when I
hmm
was thinking about the conversation that we were going to have. And like, I guess if you've processed any like big wild game animals, like what's the kind of biggest or weirdest wild game animal that you've had the job of processing?
Um, I mean, I would say probably. I would say antelope was actually the. Oh, you know what? Wild boar is the weirdest because of its spine.
Oh yeah, what's up with the spine?
It had the one that we processed had a spine that was almost like a dinosaur. And it was so bizarre. And I think it was weird for me because it was I feel so familiarized to pigs
Yes.
and uh it's supposed to be similar anatomy, but its spine was almost like it had like this hunch on its back
Hmm.
that was like where this spine had stuck up and it was extended and almost the way of like a not a tyrannosaurus. What's
Yeah,
the
a Stegosaurus.
Stegosaurus? It has spine like that, and I always thought that that was the weirdest. It was like a dinosaur animal. It was so strange,
Yeah.
and I think that that was the weirdest one. And it was really difficult to bone out, and the customer wanted it completely boneless
Hmm.
and because I had it whole, and it was really difficult to bone out. It reminded me a lot of the way that like lamb has that big part of its spine sticking out, but it was so much larger. It was odd, I guess. I had it was the first time I'd ever experienced that. Um,
How big
and it
was
was I had to do
how?
it was pretty big. It was like probably the size. It was probably almost as it's probably like 200 pounds.
Yeah, that's a decent sized pig.
It was really big. I mean, because all the other game animals that I've gotten, I don't really get them whole per se. So
Yes.
uh, I think if I worked in like a meat processor that did wild game, I would get more whole animals. But because these people they butcher it themselves, I just get it in pieces.
Yeah.
It's not as like dramatic as that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's the weirdest. I think that's the
No, no,
weirdest one I've ever seen.
it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. I didn't realize because you've got the perspective of coming from like farm pigs, and
Right.
I only have the perspective of wild boar.
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah. So for
and
me, that was
yeah,
crazy.
it's funny because I didn't realize that it's different for domesticated pigs, because I
Yeah.
that at least it's like a thing that I've kind of had to be aware of when you're shooting, like when you're thinking about shot placement with a bow. Don't shoot it too high, because if you shoot like middle or like high, end up accidentally shooting high middle, if you think about a side profile of a pig,
Right.
then the trouble is that high spine, kind of those stegosaurus parts of the spine,
Uh-huh.
mean that you're actually just shooting meat. You're not actually shoot. You might actually,
Yeah.
you're not doing the damage that you want to be doing through lungs or anything like that. So that's curious. I didn't realize that pigs kind of don't have that. So I wonder what causes that. Like they just have a easier life, I
Yeah.
guess.
I think it's just their genetics. They're to me, they're just different. I think people tend to think that like boars and just domesticated pigs are similar, but they're really not. I mean, I think that they couldn't be more different. Their flavor is different. Their anatomy is different. The color of the meat because it's wild is different.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're almost like different animals in a way.
Yeah, it's so curious though, because also there's a weird thing, at least might be folklore, but like if domesticated pigs escape, it doesn't
Hmm.
take long before they grow tusks and hair. Like
Right.
apparently, I don't know if that like
Oh, is that true? I don't know.
fact checker everyone.
Yeah.
If that's incorrect, please let me know. But
Yeah.
that's what I've been told, and I believe it for now.
I mean, I know that there are all domesticated animals are bred to be that way. So that there's all different types. So there's Duroc, Berkshire. Those are different breeds of hogs that are bred for their meat, right? So
Yeah,
they're really, if you think about it, genetically engineered animals.
yeah. Over time,
Because we've selective breeding to create these types of animals because they taste better for us.
yeah,
um they're not they're not in nature this way. So they're just really different than what you find out in nature.
it's kind of controlled to be more convenient for a meat
Oh yeah, well,
producing
because they
lots of
taste better.
meat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they taste better. Like, I mean, I think the mark of a good farmer is someone who understands the science of the animal and how to breed it selectively so that it has the right fat to meat ratio. And it's a whole process and knowing what feed does what to the animal. So versus when it's wild and it just eats whatever it wants and it tastes however it's going to taste because it's been eating acorns or it's been eating, whatever,
yeah,
like grubs. Yeah, I think that all of that um, impacts the flavor, which I don't think people realize. But
yeah.
it does. I mean, like if you're eating game birds that are eating berries, it's going to taste so much better than if it were a starving animal.
Yes, it makes absolute
Yeah.
sense. And there is a bit of that kind of talk amongst hunters who say like there's a good time to shoot bear,
Hmm.
and like a bad time. And I was lucky enough the bear I took was right at the end of berry season, which is around
Right.
about now actually. So I should probably make a plan.
Go out there. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the meat was outstanding, really, really good
Yeah.
flavor. But then people also say there's rumors of like, the dumpster diving bears that they don't taste good because they're eating all kinds of dodgy stuff. So
I
yeah,
believe it. I totally believe that. I think it depends on where in the world you're hunting, what they're eating, the time of the year. I'm sure. Because I mean, I'm sure if they're, high getting close to hibernation too, I mean, they're gonna pack more fat on as well.
yeah, yeah,
So there's a whole life cycle that you have to be aware of. It's not as easy as just going out there and finding something.
yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of seems like a nice overarching thought to kind of bring us to a close today. I wanted to just ask. Well, first of all, thank you very much for taking the
Yeah.
time and talking through everything. But is there anything else that you feel like a burning desire that we've missed today? Anything that you kind of hoping to kind of mention or talk about at all?
I did want to say that for hunters specifically, if they save the pluck and don't discard that, That's a lot of really good tasty meat that doesn't necessarily always get utilized.
Okay.
So like the heart, the liver, the
Oh,
kidneys,
okay.
saving that, or if you're butchering your own animals, like farm animals, and you
Hmm.
save that, or the caul fat, things like that, that can be repurposed into like other part food that you can make that often gets discarded.
I mean, that is when you've got an animal down, you're like, oh, I have to
Hmm.
get this out quick. I guess it's easy to just be like, all right, don't need that, don't need that. But so you mentioned a couple of things there: heart, liver, kidneys. Have you ever like is lung ever a thing that you guys?
Yeah, lung. I love lung. Lung is really good.
Is it?
It's
Okay.
so good.
I have to pick your brains about a recipe for that at some point in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah,
And then you said the cool fat. That's so. This is something I've noticed sometimes with animals is that some of them have it a lot and others don't so much. But is
right.
that the kind of
Hmm.
web of fat that's around some of the organs that you can just pull off? Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Um, that is the caul fat, and it's easier than save if you can save the intestines. It's a ton of work, but I mean, then you can make your own casing out of it. So when you make sausages, then you don't have to buy it. You just
Yes.
have to purge it, clean it by purging it with water.
Ah.
So you could save the intestines too. I think that if you have the ability to, it would behoove you to do that one because you're going to save money when you're processing for sausage because you have your own casing now. Not that casing's terribly expensive, but and it's also cooler, I guess.
Yeah. It's like the
And
whole process is
yeah,
natural.
and then caul fat and for I like to use it as for sausage patties. I do this for a lot of our customers is I will make sausage patties and then I'll wrap them in caul fat. So
Mm,
they're almost like little sausages encasing. And it tastes really good.
great.
And I'll do that for doesn't matter what deer, antelope, whatever. I'll wrap it in the caul fat. And that is a technique I actually got from the fatted calf. They do a lot of sausage patties. They're wrapped in caul fat.
Oh, I
And you
have
can put
some.
like fruit underneath it or something.
Really? Okay,
Hmm.
cool. I have some in the freezer, which on the deer that I got recently, I took it because I thought, oh, I'm probably going to use this. I had thrown it away previously. So, yeah, I'll have to,
Save it.
yeah, save it and I'll
Yeah.
pick your brains on that.
Yeah.
So, how can people find you and follow you? Is there anywhere you want people to go and check out your stories and adventures?
Yeah. So they can find me at Lady Butcher on Instagram.
Okay,
That's basically my only source of contact other than my email. If you have any inquiries, like you want me to butcher an animal for you, teach you how to butcher an animal, I do all the above. So um, I also am a chef. I worked in restaurants. I just worked an event this weekend where I cooked Argentinian meat boards for a winery. So I kind of a jack of all
great.
trades. I also private chef too. So if anybody wants that, but they can contact me through my Instagram, which is Lady BUTXCHER. Uh, yeah,
Okay, okay, good. There's like a little nuance in the spelling
yeah,
there.
exactly.
Great.
So
Well, thank you very much, Candice. That was amazing. And
yeah, thank you. I had a
yeah,
blast.
great. I'm sure at some point, if it's okay, I'll give you a phone call and pick your brains a bit more
Oh,
about
of course.
things.
Yeah, I'm happy to like honestly it's cool meeting other people that are interested in the same stuff. I don't really get to talk about this stuff that much.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, well, I'll have a bit more of a think, and maybe we could even get you on for another episode at some point in the future if you'd be
Yeah,
open to that.
definitely. I'm definitely interested. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, well, thanks again, Candice, and yeah, we'll hopefully speak to you again soon.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much, Robin.
So that's another episode processed, shrink wrapped, and in the freezer. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you found it useful. You can follow Candice at Lady Butcher on Instagram, but that is actually spelled Lady Butxcher. You can also contact her directly on Insta or via email, which is ladybutcher, the same spelling, at gmail.com. But I'll put links in the show notes. Thanks again, everyone, and until next time.